I'll pay for his coffee." That sentence, spoken on a bitterly cold morning, made the entire Rome en Route cafe seem to hold its breath. No one really knew who the girl behind those words truly was. They just recognized the warm smile and soft, mist-like voice of Avery Monroe, the waitress who was always on time, never complained, and was usually the first to fire up the coffee machine before the sun even rose. But what no one knew was that before unlocking the front door that morning, Avery had already made breakfast for her little sister, a high school junior. She'd organized her late mother's prescriptions to send off to the local clinic for a checkup, and she'd glanced at her bank balance, down to just $23. She lived in a ground-floor apartment about a 20-minute walk from the cafe, just enough of a space to call home, with windows sealed tight for the winter and hot water pipes that made strange noises far too often. But still, Avery had always considered herself lucky. There was a roof overhead, a small heater, a younger sister who needed her, and a job that kept the wheels turning, somehow. Avery's days started at 5 a.m., with the buzz of an old phone that only half held a charge. She got up quietly, careful not to wake her sister, then walked to the cafe while the streets were still asleep. Her pale olive coat was worn thin at the right shoulder, but it was still the warmest one she had. Inside the coat pocket was a small note her mother had left before she passed. "Keep showing up. Someone still needs you." Rome en Route sat tucked behind a strip of shops, sheltered beneath the branches of an old oak tree. No flashing neon signs, no trendy bar counter. The place felt more like a used bookstore that just happened to sell coffee. Cozy, smelling faintly of old wood, and often nearly empty. That winter was harsher than usual. The cold slipped in through the cracks in the door, and the already scarce customers mostly stayed home. Sales dropped, tips all but vanished. But Avery kept working double shifts, morning to evening, because she knew one thing: if she took a day off, no one would cover for her. And if she took more than one, rent would become a problem real fast. At the cafe, Avery always wore a soft smile. Not overly bright, not fake, just enough to put people at ease. But if you looked closely, you'd notice the tired eyes beneath her long lashes, the dark circles trailing down to her cheeks, and how her hands sometimes moved slower than usual, stiff from the cold. Troy, the coworker who usually shared shifts with her, once asked casually while wiping down the counter, "You ever take a day off?" Avery just smiled and rolled up her sleeve, revealing a thin scar from a hot water burn. "I take a break whenever my body forces me to," she said. It just hasn't dared to yet. No one at the cafe knew she was the legal guardian of her little sister, a bright but withdrawn teen who had been struggling with depression since their mother passed. No one knew Avery had once planned to study graphic design at the community college, but had to drop out when she couldn't cover tuition and still be the one holding her family together. No one knew she always kept a list of weekend discount stores in her wallet, not for herself, but to make sure her sister had enough school supplies. Avery didn't talk much about the past, and she definitely didn't want anyone's pity. To her, kindness was something you gave, not something you expected back. That winter, the cold was so sharp, the streets stayed frozen, even after the sun came up. The few customers who wandered into Rome en Route carried the chill with them, along with the sound of sniffling noses. Avery stayed behind the counter, hands constantly moving between a dish towel and the espresso machine. The little coffee brown ribbon she tied in her hair each morning had started to come undone from the steam in the air. No one could have guessed that just a few days later, a tiny moment, barely noticeable, would send her life in an entirely new direction. And it all started with a cappuccino she paid for out of her own pocket, for a man everyone in the cafe dismissed as just another homeless guy. But Avery didn't see it that way. To her, everyone deserved a decent morning. The rain from the night before still hadn't let up when Avery slid her key into the lock and pushed open the heavy, damp glass door. Rome en Route was still dark, lit only by a faint glow from the street lamp filtering through the thin curtains. The sharp scent of bleach still lingered in the air, mixing with the damp chill that crept through the cracks in the door. She moved quickly behind the counter, flipped on the main switch, and began her morning routine, checking the espresso machine, wiping down the surfaces, refilling the sugar jar, and tightening the wobbly chair leg near the window. Just as the clock ticked past 6, the door chime rang softly. Avery looked up, still wiping down the counter. The man standing in the doorway didn't look like any of their regulars. He was tall and thin, wrapped in a torn raincoat with one shoulder ripped open. His dark hair was wild, like it hadn't seen a comb in a week, and a salt and pepper beard covered most of his face. Rainwater dripped steadily from his hood, trailing down his nose and chin in slow, cold lines. The man didn't say a word. He just stood there, eyes the color of ash, scanning the room now lit by overhead lights. Avery stayed behind the counter, watching him closely. She didn't feel fear, not even caution, just awareness. He wasn't shivering like someone looking for shelter from the cold, and he wasn't loitering like someone about to ask for spare change. He just stood there, then quietly walked to the last table in the back, the warmest spot in the cafe, near the space heater. Troy came in right after, shaking the rain from his hoodie when he froze mid-step. The unfamiliar man sat motionless in the corner. Troy frowned and shot Avery a quick look. "You know him?" "No," Avery said, her eyes still on the man, now sitting with his hands pressed together in his lap like he was praying. "Looks like a drifter," Troy muttered. "This place isn't a shelter, you know that. Don't let guys like that hang around too long. They bring trouble." Avery set the towel down and stepped out from behind the counter. "If he hasn't done anything wrong," she said softly but firmly, "then we have no reason to ask him to leave." Troy didn't argue. He just shook his head and went back to rummaging through the cabinets, the clatter of dishes echoing his frustration. Avery turned back, started up the espresso machine, ground the beans. The milk hissed and frothed, its steam curling into the cold air. She didn't ask the man what he wanted. He didn't order. But deep down, she knew with a strange kind of certainty, what he needed was a cappuccino. Not to wake up, but to feel like he still existed, like he was still seen as a person. She took the last small croissant from the display case, not the biggest one, not the broken one either. Just the one that was enough, golden, warm again after a quick turn in the toaster oven. When everything was ready, she didn't write up a receipt. She didn't ask his name. She didn't smile. She simply placed the tray quietly on the table where he sat. The man looked up slightly. He glanced at her like he was about to ask something, then didn't. His eyes, set deep beneath a furrowed brow, didn't flinch. They weren't teary. They weren't sad. Just quiet, like cold embers. Not out, but close. Avery gave a small nod instead of words, then turned back to the counter, drying a glass that still held a few drops. Even with her back turned, she could feel him watching her. No one said anything else. Troy glanced over, then went back to scrubbing the chalkboard menu. Outside, the rain began to fade, but the cold still lingered in every draft. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Only the silence felt real, and the cup of coffee, steaming gently between hands that probably couldn't remember the last time they were treated like they belonged to a person. He didn't reach for it right away. The man just stared at the cappuccino, as if it were something strange and distant, almost unfamiliar. Then slowly he reached out, both hands trembling as they wrapped around the warm ceramic cup. His fingers were thin, marked with old calluses. His nails were jagged, half-bitten. And when the foam touched his lips, he closed his eyes, holding still like he was trying to make that feeling last just a little longer. Behind the counter, Avery didn't stare, but she saw it clearly, the way he held the cup with both hands, not just for warmth, like he was holding on to something fragile. About 2 minutes later, he gave the smallest nod. No words, no smile, just one slow, quiet nod, but it was enough for her to know. He understood, and he was grateful. Troy quietly stepped closer, lining up a few syrup bottles on the back shelf. He spoke in a low voice, eyes still on the man sitting silently in the corner. "You know, people like that, they take advantage of kindness. You give once, they come back, then others follow. We can't turn this place into a charity shelter." Avery didn't answer. She kept drying the third glass of the day, hands moving with quiet precision. Troy waited a beat, no response. He sighed and walked away. She wasn't angry with him. That kind of reaction didn't surprise her. Most people were afraid of being taken advantage of, afraid of losing control, afraid of trouble showing up without a name. But Avery felt something in that man, something different. She couldn't explain it, couldn't name it, just knew there was something in his eyes that made it impossible to look away. Maybe it was the way he sat, upright, shoulders heavy but not hunched like someone used to begging for sympathy, or the way he drank his coffee, slow, steady sips, not rushed or desperate. Maybe it was his eyes, not sharp, not scheming, just quiet, like someone staring at a memory that used to feel close but now felt miles away. Half an hour passed. He didn't ask for anything else. Didn't say a word. Didn't leave. He just sat there, quiet, still, like part of the air in the room. Not drawing attention, not touching anything he shouldn't, not making a single unnecessary sound. Avery didn't approach him again. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't try to be friendly. But inside her, something had started to stir. A faint, unshakable feeling, like recognizing someone you're sure you've never met. Just before the clock hit 7, the man slowly stood up. He took a blank receipt slip from the stack clipped near the sugar tray. Sitting back down, he pulled a pen from the pocket of his worn raincoat and began to write something on the back. Avery couldn't see what it was. He folded the paper, tucked it under the plate that still held half a croissant, then walked toward the door. No one stopped him, no one said goodbye. He opened the door quietly, letting in a gust of cold wind and a few more drops of rain, then shut it gently behind him. Avery waited a few minutes. Then she walked over to the table. The coffee cup was empty, just a faint ring of milk foam clinging to the rim. The napkin was still neatly folded, and beneath the plate, just as she'd guessed, was the receipt slip, covered in clean, steady handwriting. She picked it up, unsure if she should read it, but her eyes caught on the first line, standing alone in the white space. "Thank you for not looking at me like I was trash." That was it. No name, no date, no other lines. But the handwriting was firm, even, deliberate. The kind of writing that belonged to someone who had written a lot in their life, or at least, someone who once wrote things that mattered. Avery folded the slip of paper and tucked it into a small drawer behind the counter. She didn't explain it to anyone. Didn't bring it up again. She just went on with her day like usual. But inside, that sentence kept echoing, like a sound that wouldn't fade. No one in the cafe knew who the man was. And after that morning, he never came back. For the next week, he didn't return. Each morning, Avery opened the shop right on time. She wiped down the last table near the space heater, straightened the chair, just like always. But the table stayed empty. The rain had stopped. The skies turned to that pale winter sun, and more people began to fill the streets again. Still, that corner of the cafe, the warmest spot, remained untouched, like a quiet pocket no one dared to enter. She didn't ask the regulars about him. She didn't mention it to Troy. Everything moved on as if he'd never been there. But Avery remembered. She remembered everything. The eyes, the hands, the handwriting on that single piece of paper. On Saturday morning, right as she was arranging pastries in the display case, a delivery driver knocked on the door. He wore a rain-speckled green uniform and handed her a small parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. No store logo, no return address. The name on the label read, Avery M., handwritten, neat and precise. She signed for it, hesitating a moment before opening it. No one in the cafe seemed to notice. Troy was busy arguing with the manager over the new coffee bean pricing, and the early morning customers were glued to their phones or tablets. Avery quietly stepped behind the counter, peeled back the wrapping with care. Inside was a small, unsealed cardboard box. She opened the lid. It was a wooden keychain, hand-carved, shaped like a maple leaf turning color. The front was smooth, the natural grain of the wood rising like veins. On the back, etched in fine, clean lettering, a place to return to. Thank you for keeping that alive. There was nothing else. No note, no receipt, no trace. Avery held the keychain in her hand, turning it over and over. The wood carried a faint scent, like old sandalwood, simple and warm. She didn't need to guess who had sent it. There was no one else it could have been, but maybe that's what gave the gift its quiet weight, the absence of a name, the lack of anything official. It was real simply because it existed. She closed the box, slipped the keychain into the left pocket of her worn coat, the one her mother had once sewn an extra lining into, so she could keep the keys to their first apartment safe. From that day on, she never added it to her keyring. She didn't wear it out, didn't show it off. She just kept it there, quietly, privately. No one asked about the package. Avery never brought it up. But from that morning forward, every time her hands slipped into her pocket and touched that smooth, cool surface of carved wood, something inside her softened, as if she'd just been reminded someone, without ever needing to, had left her something kind. She didn't expect the man to come back. But in a small, quiet corner of her heart, buried deep and still, she wondered. Maybe, just maybe, there might come a day when he would return, not out of debt, not out of gratitude, but simply because he remembered. This was a place where someone once saw him as a person. The weeks passed quietly. The keychain stayed tucked in Avery's coat pocket, a habit so familiar she stopped thinking about it. The man didn't return. No more packages came. Life at Roman Root went on as it always had. Early shifts, silent regulars, gray afternoons that felt heavier than they looked. The first snow of the season had fallen, thin and soft, like salt scattered across the windows, but enough to make Avery slip an extra layer of insulation into her boots. She still showed up on time, still poured cappuccinos with numb fingers, still stayed quiet when it mattered, as if both she and the cafe had made peace with not expecting anything more. Until one Tuesday morning. The glass door swung open with a chime that rang sharper than usual. Cold air swept in, along with the scent of deep, smoky cologne and something else no one could name, but everyone felt. Someone who didn't belong here had just walked in. The man wore a charcoal gray suit tailored down to every seam, a long overcoat draped over his shoulders. Polished black leather shoes caught the soft yellow light of the cafe. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw clean-shaven, his movements unhurried, yet unmistakably those of someone used to being in control. A classic mechanical watch wrapped his left wrist. A slim document bag hung from his right hand. He paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in the room, then walked straight toward the counter, where the manager was checking inventory. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and steady, every word slow and deliberate. "I'd like to speak to the manager." The manager looked up, hesitating for just a second at the presence in front of him. "I'm in charge of the morning shift," he replied. "How can I help you?" The man gently placed the document bag on the counter. "I'm here to make an announcement. As of this morning, the purchase of Roman Root is complete. I'm the cafe's new owner." The room froze. Two customers tapping away on laptops stopped mid-keystroke. Someone near the door dropped the lid to their coffee. Troy, who had been stocking pastries, spun around, eyes wide. The manager opened his mouth to ask something, but before he could speak, another voice slipped into the silence. Only it wasn't quite a voice. It was breath. From Avery. She had just stepped out from the back, a tray of paper cups in hand, when her eyes met his. She froze. Her heart hit once, hard, then seemed to burst wide in her chest. It was him. There was no mistaking him. Even clean-shaven, even dressed in a tailored suit, even looking a decade younger, she knew those eyes. Deep, steady, worn down by something over time, but never fully extinguished. This time, they weren't hidden behind tangled hair or a torn raincoat. This time, they looked directly at her, calm, assured, and fully aware of what they were doing. And he saw her too. In that brief moment, everyone else in the cafe seemed to vanish from his view. There was only Avery. She still wore the same faded olive coat, hair pulled up, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. The tray of paper cups was still in her hands, frozen mid-step. He smiled. Not a polite surface-level smile, but a real one. The kind that comes from someone who knows they owe something. He stepped forward, his voice softer now, but clear enough to reach her. "I owe you a croissant," he said. "And a conversation." The words landed softly like a snowflake, but they tightened something in Avery's chest. She didn't move, just looked at him, as if every question she might have asked had gotten stuck somewhere in her throat. She didn't need confirmation, didn't need to ask why, because in the silence between them, she knew one thing for sure. The man who once held a cappuccino in shaking hands was now standing before her as the new owner of the cafe. And he hadn't forgotten. Avery couldn't quite remember how the two of them ended up sitting at the same table that afternoon. Maybe the manager suggested it. Maybe he asked. But what she did remember, without a doubt, was that she said yes, even though her heart was still layered in quiet hesitation. The cafe felt unusually still as they sat across from each other, at that same familiar table, the one where he once curled into himself beneath a torn raincoat, the one where she once set down a cappuccino without a bill. His name now was Grant Callahan. All the cafe's legal documents confirmed it. A name that had once appeared in Forbes 3 years in a row. A name ranked among the top 100 most influential venture capitalists in North America. He'd run a major medical tech fund, spoken on global stages, advised startups worth hundreds of millions. On paper, Grant was the perfect story. Brilliant, wealthy, successful. But the man sitting across from Avery now was a different version. Less polished, less rehearsed, and somehow more real. "I used to think I had everything," he said, voice calm. "No bragging, no hiding. My wife was an architect. We used to dream about opening a small cafe at the edge of the woods after retirement. Not busy, just warm enough. He pulled a thin photo from his wallet and set it on the table. A small wooden cabin nestled in a pine-covered hillside. Sunlight slanted through wide glass windows. A piano sat near a fireplace, and behind it, an old bookshelf, heavy with stories. Grant looked at the picture like he was staring into a memory he couldn't return to. That year, he said quietly, a wildfire tore through the outskirts of our town. My wife was home. I was on a work trip, flying into San Jose a few hours away. Avery said nothing. She didn't ask. She just listened. She wasn't hurt, but everything was gone. The architectural sketches she'd drawn back in college, the unfinished manuscript of a book she was writing, her grandmother's antique piano. Memories, moments, all turned to ash. She tried to hold it together, but I knew what she lost wasn't just things. Grant paused, took a slow, steady breath, then continued. A month later, she left. No anger, no blame. She just said she wanted to move back near her mother in Ireland. I didn't stop her. I didn't blame her, because I knew I'd lost my way too. After that, he walked away from everything. The company, his shares, every investment project. He sold the house, cut off all partnerships. No one could find him. The media speculated, but there was never a statement. Grant Callahan vanished from the business world as if he had never been there at all. I wasn't looking to die, he said, eyes fixed on the strip of sunlight crossing the table. I just didn't want to exist the way I had anymore. He drifted through dozens of cities, never used his real name, carried no credit cards, slept in cheap motels, train station benches, sometimes a shelter, never spoke more than a sentence to anyone, left no trace behind. Then one winter morning, he walked into Rome en route, just to get out of the wind, just to find a little warmth. And someone, a quiet girl who never asked his name, placed a hot cup of coffee and a small pastry in front of him. Not out of pity, not because she had to, for no reason at all. That day, Grant said, his voice softer now, was the first time in 2 years I felt human again. Not a shadow, not a burden, just seen. He returned a few days later, but only sat across the street. He didn't go in, he just watched again. The girl, Avery, always began her shift by wiping down the table near the heater. She had no idea he was still there, still watching from a distance. After 2 weeks, Grant started inquiring about buying the cafe. Not because he saw a smart investment, not out of some sense of debt, but because he believed some things in life are meant to be passed on. Like a quiet chain of kindness, moving from one person to the next. I didn't buy this place to start over, he said, finishing his thought. I bought it to give what you gave me to someone else. Avery tightened her hand slightly under the table. Her heart wasn't racing, but it was beating deep, very deep. She looked at him. No longer a stranger, not quite familiar. And in his eyes, she saw something money couldn't ever buy back. The humility of someone who had been broken and was learning how to stand again. No words were spoken right after. They sat in silence, side by side with cooling tea and the fading light of day sliding across the cafe windows. Inside Avery, everything was moving at once. Part of her stirred by the story he had shared, another part still uncertain, questioning if she had somehow misunderstood what she'd just heard. Grant looked at her, not pushing, not rushing to explain. He simply placed a slim folder on the table between them, didn't open it, just gently slid it her way. I came prepared, he said, voice calm, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. This isn't just about saying thank you. I want to hand over the cafe to you. Avery's eyes shot up. To me? You understand this place better than anyone I've met, Grant replied. And more importantly, you know how to see people, not for how they look, but for who they are. She looked at the folder, a tremor passing through her. Every part of her instinct said, no, I can't. She had never managed anyone, never studied business operations, never imagined herself in a role higher than shift lead. She didn't have a degree, no savings, nothing but a pair of tired hands worn out from double shifts that started before dawn and ended after sunset. I'm not qualified, Avery said quietly. I didn't finish college. I've never run anything. I don't even know how to read a financial report. I'm just someone trying to make it through the day. Grant didn't argue. He sat still, listening. Then gently placed both hands on the table, fingers laced. You know, he said slowly, back when I was running the fund, I interviewed hundreds of people, MBAs, PhDs, resumes longer than most novels. But most of them, when faced with someone different than them, they looked away. Avery said nothing. She just looked into his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a venture capitalist anymore, and not the eyes of the rain-soaked stranger from that morning. They were the eyes of someone who had lost, who had risen, and who now wanted to pass on something deeper than responsibility, trust. Only you, Grant continued, only you saw a person, not a problem. You didn't ask who I was. You weren't afraid I'd scare away customers. You just saw that I needed a cup of coffee, and you gave it. Avery felt her throat tighten. Her first instinct was to say no. Not because she didn't want it, but because she'd never been trusted like this before. Never had anyone place something this big in her hands. So big, it scared her. You don't understand, she said, trying to steady her voice. I'm still figuring out how to put food on the table for my sister. I'm still paying off old tuition debt. I can't risk something this big just because I was kind one time. Grant smiled, unshaken. That's exactly why it matters, he said. Because it was kindness, done without expecting anything. That's what makes it trustworthy. He stood, leaving the folder on the table. I don't need an answer today, but I'm leaving this here. Keep it. Think about it. And if one day you feel ready, I believe this place, this cafe, could become something more than just a coffee shop. Avery didn't touch the folder. She just looked at it, like it was a door that had just been cracked open, but her hand hadn't quite reached for the knob. Her past, the struggles, the doubts, the quiet fractures built up over years, were now brushing up against her present, forming a pause in time that felt both terrifying and worth considering. Avery didn't sleep that night. She returned to the small apartment long after the city had gone quiet. The yellow glow from the window across the street cast soft shadows on her ceiling. Her sister was already asleep. Schoolbooks spread across the desk, and the pot of lentil soup Avery had made earlier still sat warm on the stove. But she didn't touch any of it. Her mind spun. Her breath came unevenly. Her heart kept folding in on itself, quietly, under the weight of emotions she couldn't name. Gratitude, fear, hope, doubt, all tangled like a song that hadn't found its chorus. As the first light broke the horizon, she pulled on her coat, wrapped her old scarf around her neck, and stepped outside without telling anyone. No work schedule, no bag, just bare hands, and cold air slipping down her collar like a question waiting to be answered. The door to Roman Root was ajar, as if it already knew she was coming. Inside, the cafe was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the security lights. Avery turned on the switch. The lights warmed to life, soft and slow, like morning breath. She walked, unhurried, to the familiar table, the one by the heater, where he had once sat, where she had once left a cup of coffee without asking for anything in return. On the table sat a small wooden box, draped with a thin cream-colored cloth. Avery lifted the cover. Inside was a bundle of documents, tied neatly with a ribbon the color of ash. Transfer of management, signed, finalized, ready. And tucked at the top, a handwritten card. The handwriting was unmistakable, each word etched like it mattered. You don't have to be someone to begin, you just have to begin. Avery took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold. She didn't sign anything. She didn't take the folder. But as she stood to leave, her fingers slipped into her coat pocket and found what had been there for a month now, the carved wooden keychain, shaped like a maple leaf. She clipped the maple leaf keychain onto the cafe key, not because the decision was final, but as a quiet promise to herself that maybe she wasn't ready for everything, but she was ready to hold on to something. The next morning, the sign on the front door of Roman Root had been replaced, handwritten in slanted black ink, temporarily closed to rebuild the heart of this place. See you again, a better version of us awaits. No one knew exactly what was happening. They just saw the door stay shut for a week, lights flickering on at odd hours. The sound of chairs being moved, things being shifted, a soft hammer tapping somewhere behind the walls. A few regulars passed by, read the sign, smiled, and kept walking. Avery didn't post anything online, no long status updates, no grand announcements. She spent the week quietly, wiping down every bookshelf, reorganizing the old menus, throwing out the chipped mugs no one had dared to toss before, and replacing them with new ones bought from her own savings. Not from any investment fund. By the 7th day, the cold had settled in again, but golden light spilled across the sidewalk. She arrived early, wearing the coat with worn shoulders, hair pulled back, the same old boots, still marked with white salt from the last snowfall. Avery slid the key into the lock. Click. That familiar sound. She pushed the door open, stepped inside, and for the first time in a week, switched on the cafe's main lights. The glow poured out across the entire room. The familiar space felt different now, not because of the furniture, but because something in the energy had shifted. The tables had been pulled closer together, and in one corner, a small hand-lettered sign hung from a simple wooden frame. Need a place to rest? Just sit. A faint scent of fresh paint still lingered, blending softly with the aroma of half-roasted coffee from the night before. Avery stood in the center of the lit-up cafe, taking it all in. Every detail, every quiet corner, as if she were looking at herself. A version both worn and freshly wiped clean, both bruised and gently mended by kindness. And for the first time in years, she smiled, not to hide the pain, but because she didn't have to anymore. Not everything was fixed, not everything was certain, but for the first time, she knew. She had a place to begin again. And this time, it wasn't just for her. Sometimes a cup of coffee isn't just a cup of coffee. It's a way for someone to feel seen, to feel acknowledged, to be reminded that they still exist in this world. And sometimes, the only thing we need to begin again is someone who believes in us, even before we dare to believe in ourselves. Have you ever had a moment like that? When one small act changed the course of your life? If this story spoke to you, leave a comment below. Share how it made you feel, or tell us about a time a stranger showed you kindness. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story of healing and hope. Thanks for staying with us until the end. Wishing you a day that's warm enough and a place you can always come back to.